"Ma'am, what exactly do you think you're doing on my property?" That was the first thing I yelled, the moment my boots hit the dirt. I had just pulled up in my work truck, tired, dusty, ready for a cold beer and a quiet evening, only to find a paving crew, three guys in neon vests who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, trenching straight into the edge of my driveway. The smell of fresh, steaming asphalt hit me before the reality did. Power tools were screaming, a steamroller was idling, and right in the middle of this industrial chaos stood a woman in a bright pink blazer, holding an iced latte like she was supervising the construction of the pyramids. That was my unforgettable introduction to Brenda, the self-appointed queen of a neighborhood that didn't have a throne, didn't have a crown, and most importantly, didn't have a homeowners association. She didn't flinch when I yelled. She didn't turn around. She didn't even blink. She just waved her hand at the workers, a dismissive little flick of the wrist, and said, "Finish the connection on our side." The HOA approved this adjustment. There is no HOA. Never has been. And as I stood there, staring at 10 feet of my land disappearing under her illegal asphalt, the air around me hit that strange, heavy calm that only comes right before a tornado touches down. Brenda had just crossed a line carved in stone, and she had absolutely no idea the war she had just started. To understand why I didn't just go to jail that day, you have to understand what this neighborhood used to be like. Before Brenda, for 8 years, I lived in what I considered paradise. It wasn't fancy. It was the kind of street where you could hear the wind in the oaks, where you could borrow a socket wrench from a neighbor at midnight without explaining why, and where nobody cared if your recycling bin was blue, green, or polka-dotted. I run a small landscaping business, and I bought my place specifically for the layout. A modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a massive detached garage out back and a long, winding gravel driveway that wrapped around the side of the property like a lazy river. To anyone else, it was just a driveway. To me, it was the spine of my livelihood. My truck, my trailer, my mowers, my crew, we all staged there. It was wide, practical, and mine. And in 8 years, not a single soul had complained. In fact, the neighbors liked having a landscaper nearby. I trimmed hedges for the elderly couple next door for free. I hauled off storm debris after the hurricanes. We looked out for each other. Then the for sale sign went up next door, and a month later, the circus rolled into town. Brenda and her husband, Gary, moved in with a fleet of matching white SUVs that looked like they'd never touched a speck of dirt in their lives. The movers hadn't even finished unloading the sectional sofa before Brenda marched across the lawn to introduce herself. I was out by the truck, sharpening a mower blade. She walked up, looked me up and down like I was a suspicious package left at an airport, and didn't offer a hand. "You must be the one with the work truck," she said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "That's me," I said, wiping grease off my hands. "Jack, nice to meet you." She tilted her head, looking at my truck like it was a contagious disease. "It makes the street look industrial," she said. "We moved here for the ambience. We'll have to see about getting that moved." That was her first sentence to me. I didn't even know her last name yet, and she had already decided my career was a blemish on her view. Gary, the husband, wasn't much better. He was the kind of guy who walked around with his hands on his hips, frowning at tree branches and muttering about curb appeal, while doing absolutely zero yard work himself. Within a week, they had painted their house a blinding shade of luxury cream, installed motion sensor lights that were bright enough to land a 747, and started sliding anonymous notes under everyone's doors. Notes about barking dogs, about wind chimes being orally intrusive, and about my truck being an eyesore. We all ignored it. We figured they were just adjusting. They'd calm down, right? Wrong. Brenda wasn't settling in. She was revving up. The real trouble started with the cones. I came home one Tuesday to find 2 bright orange traffic cones sitting on my gravel driveway. Not near the property line, on my land. Like 3 feet in. I got out, picked them up, and tossed them back onto her grass. I figured a contractor had left them. The next day, they were back. Repositioned, angled, claimed. So I knocked on their door. Gary answered, wearing a polo shirt tucked into shorts that were far too expensive for a Tuesday. "Oh, those," he said, giving me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "We're thinking the driveway between our houses could be shared. It would really open up the flow." I stared at him, trying to process the level of entitlement required to say that sentence out loud. "It's my driveway, Gary. It's on my deed. Yes, but you have so much of it, he said, like he was explaining simple math to a slow child. We entertain often. We simply need additional parking for our guests. It just makes sense to widen the access point. No, I said. The smile dropped off his face like a wet tile. Fine, he snapped. We'll see about that. Over the next week, it was a cold war. I'd come home to find chalk lines drawn across my gravel. I'd see Brenda strutting around the property line with a clipboard, making notes and pointing at my garage. One morning, I found a paper taped to my front door titled Driveway Violation. Notice one. It had HOA printed in bold letters at the top. I walked over to her while she was watering her petunias. Brenda, I said, holding up the paper. There is no HOA. Stop taping trash to my door. She didn't look up from the flowers. We've been discussing forming one. It's long overdue. Someone needs to maintain standards. You and Gary aren't an HOA, I said. You're just annoying. She stood up then, adjusting her sunglasses. You should consider updating that driveway, Jack. Gravel is so rustic. If we're going to share it, it really should be paved to match ours. We aren't sharing anything, I said, turning to walk away. You're being unreasonable, she called after me. I didn't respond. I didn't think I needed to. I had the deed. I had the survey. I had the law. In my mind, the conversation was over. But in Brenda's mind, no wasn't a boundary. It was a negotiation tactic. That afternoon, I saw her and Gary out there with a tape measure. A standard, yellow, 25-foot tape measure. They were measuring from their garage to the middle of my driveway, nodding, writing things down. I watched them from my kitchen window, shaking my head. I thought they were just deluding themselves. I didn't realize they were drawing battle lines. Which brings us back to the asphalt. I had left early that morning for a big job across town. My driveway was gravel. When I came back at 4 p.m., a 10-foot section of it, the part closest to the street, right where it bordered their lot, was gone. In its place was a fresh, steaming, black layer of asphalt that seamlessly connected their driveway to mine, effectively widening their entrance by stealing a chunk of my land. And there was Brenda, sipping her latte, watching the steam rise. I slammed my truck door. Stop, I yelled at the crew. Stop right now. The foreman looked up, confused. Lady said she owned it. Said it was a joint project. She lied. I shouted. This is private property. Get your equipment off my land. Brenda stepped forward, shielding her eyes from the sun. Don't be dramatic, Jack. We're connecting the driveways. The committee approved it. What committee? I demanded, walking right up to the edge of the wet asphalt. The committee of voices in your head. The neighborhood council, she said smugly. Richard and I voted on it last night. I felt a vein in my forehead start to throb. You voted to steal my land? We voted to improve the curb appeal, Gary chimed in, walking out of his garage. It looks much better, doesn't it? Cleaner. More uniform. It's illegal. I screamed. You paved over my property. My survey says otherwise, Brenda said, tapping her clipboard. What survey? The one Gary did yesterday, she said. I blinked. With the tape measure? You think a tape measure overrides a county survey? It was a contractor-grade tape measure, she said, dead serious. We're confident in the results. I looked at the foreman. If you pour 1 more ounce of asphalt, I'm suing your company into the ground. The foreman looked at Brenda, looked at me, looked at the property line which was clearly marked by an old oak tree, and signaled his guys to cut the engines. He knew a disaster when he saw one. He packed up his crew and left without even asking for payment, leaving a half-finished, cooling slab of theft on my lawn. Fine, Brenda huffed. Leave it unfinished. It still proves our point. The only thing it proves, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, is that you people have lost your minds. It's our driveway now, Gary said, crossing his arms. We've improved it. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I walked into my house before I did something that would require bail money. I called the police non-emergency line, but they told me it was a civil matter since it was a boundary dispute. I called a lawyer, who told me I'd win, but it would take months and cost thousands. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. Brenda was out there, placing little solar lights along the edge of the new asphalt. She was decorating the land she stole. And that's when it hit me. They thought they had won. They thought that because the asphalt was down, the land was theirs. They thought I would just roll over because removing it was too hard. But I'm a landscaper. I move dirt for a living. I changed the shape of the earth every single day. And if they wanted to play games with my land, well, I was about to show them what a professional can do. The next morning, the harassment escalated. Brenda started parking her SUV diagonally across the new asphalt, the nose of her car fully blocking my exit. I had to drive over my own lawn to get to work. Then came the party. It was a Thursday night. I came home tired, dirty, just wanting peace. Instead, I found my driveway, the gravel part, the part they hadn't even paved, filled with cars. A BMW, a Lexus, a minivan. Brenda was hosting a wine mixer. Her guests were parked on my land. I walked over. Brenda, tell your guests to move their cars. She laughed, holding a glass of Chardonnay. Oh, Jack, don't be a grouch. We're using the overflow parking. It's a shared resource now, remember? It's not shared, I said. We're forming a formal HOA next month, she whispered, leaning in, her breath smelling of expensive wine and malice. You'll have to comply then. You might as well get used to it. I looked at the cars. I looked at her smug face. I looked at Gary, who was wearing a captain's hat for some reason. Okay, I said. Okay. I went inside. I didn't sleep. I plotted. The thing about revenge is that people think it has to be loud. They think it has to be violent. But the best revenge is lawful. The best revenge is using your own property rights so aggressively that the other person chokes on them. Brenda wanted to manage my driveway? Fine. I'd give her something to manage. I made a call at 6 a.m. Hey, Tony, I said to my supplier. Yeah, it's Jack. I need a delivery. Rush order. Yeah, bring the big dump truck. What do you need? Tony asked. Topsoil? Gravel? Mulch, I said. The darkest, dampest, smelliest mulch you got. 10 yards of it. 10 yards. Tony laughed. That's a mountain, Jack. Where you want it? I looked out the window at the pristine, stolen strip of asphalt connecting our driveways. Right on the edge of the property line, I said. On the pavement. At 8 a.m., the ground shook. The diesel engine of a massive dump truck rumbled down the street. Brenda was outside, watering her new solar lights. She looked up, confused. The truck backed up. Beep, beep, beep. The driver, a guy named Sal who knew me well, leaned out. Right here, Jack. Right there, Sal. Drop it. No. Brenda screamed, dropping her hose. No. What are you doing? Sal pulled the lever. The bed tilted, and 10 cubic yards of steaming, organic mulch cascaded onto the driveway. It buried the solar lights. It buried the shared connection. It formed a wall of brown, earthy matter 5 feet high and 12 feet wide. Brenda stood there, mouth open, as the dust settled. What is this? She shrieked. Landscaping supplies, I said, leaning on my porch railing. I'm storing it for a job. On my property. You're blocking our driveway. No, I said. I'm blocking my driveway. You have your own. Use it. Gary came running out in his bathrobe. This is insane. You can't dump trash here. It's high-grade mulch, Gary. $50 a yard. Don't touch it, or I'll sue you for theft. For 3 days, the mulch mountain stood. It smelled like a forest floor after a rainstorm, rich, pungent, and earthy. Brenda hated it. She tried to shovel it, but she gave up after 5 minutes. Guests had to park on the street and walk around the pile. But Brenda, being Brenda, didn't fold. She escalated. She stuck a sign in the mulch pile. HOA violation, unsightly debris, fine $200. I took the sign, wiped my boots on it, and threw it away. Then, she called a tow truck. I watched from the window as the driver pulled up, looked at the pile of dirt, looked at Brenda, and laughed in her face. Lady, I tow cars. I don't tow geography, so I decided to up the ante. Mulch was soft. Mulch was temporary. I needed something harder. Tony, I said on the phone the next week. I need gravel. The big stuff. River rock. Heavy. Same spot. Same spot. Pile it higher. When the gravel arrived, the sound was deafening. Thousands of pounds of stone crashing onto the asphalt. It spilled over the sides, scratching the paint on her decorative fence. It was a fortress of stone. Brenda came out screaming. I am calling the police. This is harassment. Call them, I said. The police came. Officer Miller. Good guy. He looked at the gravel pile. He looked at the survey map I handed him. He looked at Brenda. Ma'am, Miller said. Is this pile on his side of the line? Well, yes, but it's the shared access zone. There's no such thing on this map, Miller said. It looks like he's storing gravel on his own land. Nothing I can do. Civil matter. Brenda turned a color I didn't know existed. It was somewhere between eggplant and nuclear fallout. But I wasn't done. I wanted to end this. I wanted to make sure she never, ever looked at my property again without feeling a deep, primal sense of regret. I needed a centerpiece. I needed a monument. I called a rental company. I need a portable toilet, I said. A porta potty. Standard or deluxe? Standard. But I need a specific color. Do you have electric blue? Like, really bright. We got blue. Perfect. Deliver it tomorrow. And bring a padlock. The next day at noon, the truck arrived. The driver hoisted the unit off the flatbed. It was a beacon, a towering, plastic monolith of blue standing in stark contrast to Brenda's luxury cream house. Where do you want it? The driver asked. I pointed to the very edge of the gravel pile, right on the property line, inches from her new fence. Right there. Face the door toward the street so everyone can see it. He dropped it. Thud. It was magnificent. It sat there, ugly and undeniable. I walked over and zip-tied a laminated sign to the door. Private property. Contractor use only. Brenda didn't scream this time. She just made a high-pitched keening noise, like a tea kettle boiling over. She ran inside. 10 minutes later, Richard came out. He looked like a broken man. Jack, he pleaded. Please. It's a toilet. It's a necessary facility for my workers, I lied. I have a crew coming next week. It's right in front of our living room window, he whispered. I know, I said. Great view, huh? By evening, the neighborhood had noticed. Kids were riding their bikes past it, pointing and laughing. Someone, I suspect the teenager down the street, had taped a paper crown to the roof of the porta potty. They were calling it Karen's Throne. The name stuck instantly. Meet you by the throne, I heard a jogger say. Brenda lost her mind. She spent the next day pacing her yard, filming the toilet, ranting into her phone. She looked disheveled. Her hair was frizzy. The perfect neighbor, mask was melting. That night, she filed the lawsuit. I got served 2 days later. Henderson versus Field. She was suing me for visual assault, property devaluation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress via sanitary infrastructure. I called my cousin, who's a lawyer. He laughed for 5 minutes straight. She sued the toilet, Jack? She actually sued the toilet. She sued me for the toilet. This is going to be fun, he said. Countersue. Trespassing. Destruction of property. Illegal paving. Let's bury her. The court date arrived a month later. Walking into that courtroom was like walking into the Super Bowl. Half the neighborhood had shown up. Mrs. Gable from across the street was eating popcorn. Brenda and Gary walked in carrying binders that were covered in gold stickers and glitter. They looked like they were presenting a middle school science project. Brenda looked frantic. Richard looked like he was dissociating from reality. The judge, a man named Judge Holloway who looked like he had zero patience for suburban nonsense, called the case. All right, Holloway said, rubbing his temples. Mrs. Henderson, you're claiming visual assault? Brenda stood up. She launched into a speech she had clearly rehearsed in the mirror. She talked about community standards, about harmony, about the sanctity of the view shed. She used the word aesthetic 14 times. And, she concluded, pointing a trembling finger at me, he placed a biological hazard on the shared driveway to terrorize us. Shared driveway, the judge asked. Show me the deed. Gary stood up. He fumbled with the glittery binder. Papers fell out everywhere. He finally produced a piece of graph paper. We measured it, Gary said proudly. With a tape measure. The courtroom went silent. You measured it, the judge repeated. Is this a certified survey? It's better, Brenda interrupted. Richard is very precise. My lawyer stood up. He didn't say a word. He just walked up to the bench and laid down the official county survey, my deed, and the photos of them paving over my land. Judge Holloway looked at the survey. He looked at the graph paper. He looked at Brenda. Mrs. Henderson, the judge said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Did you pave over your neighbor's property based on a drawing your husband made with a tape measure? We improved it, she shrieked. And did you? The judge continued, looking at the photos of the porta potty. Sue this man because he placed a temporary structure on his own land? It's ugly, she yelled. It's legal, the judge snapped. Then came the surprise witness. My lawyer called the paving contractor to the stand. Mr. Davis, my lawyer asked, did Mrs. Henderson tell you she owned the land? Yes, the contractor said, looking annoyed. She said the neighbor was okay with it. She paid cash. No permits. The judge slammed his gavel down. It sounded like a gunshot. This is absurd, Judge Holloway said. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Henderson, you have trespassed, you have defaced property, and you have wasted this court's time with a frivolous lawsuit. He looked at me. Mr. Field, I am granting your countersuit. He turned back to Brenda. You are ordered to remove the asphalt, the fence, and the lighting at your own expense. You will restore the land to its original condition within 10 days. You will pay Mr. Field's legal fees. And if you ever file a document in my court based on a tape measure survey again, I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin. Dismissed. Brenda didn't move. She sat there, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The gallery erupted in applause. Actually, applause. I walked out of that courtroom feeling lighter than air. When I got home, the demolition started immediately. The Hendersons had to hire a crew to jackhammer up the asphalt they had paid to lay down just 2 months earlier. The sound of that jackhammer was the sweetest music I have ever heard. They took down the fence. They pulled up the lights. They stood on their porch, watching their empire crumble, looking defeated and small. Brenda, tried to talk to me once during the cleanup. She walked up to the property line, looking haggard. We just wanted it to look nice, she whispered. I looked at her. I looked at the pile of gravel, the torn-up earth, and the glorious blue porta-potty still standing sentinel. It looked fine before you got here, I said. Next time, stay on your side of the line. 2 months later, the for sale sign went up. They couldn't take the shame. Every time they drove past Karen's throne, which I kept for an extra 3 weeks, just for fun, they had to relive the humiliation. They moved out in the middle of the night, loading their white SUVs and disappearing into the darkness. The neighborhood is quiet again. The gravel is back. The wind blows through the oaks. And sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch with a cold beer, watching the sun go down over my unpaved, unshared, perfectly rustic driveway, I think about them. I think about the power of saying no, and I smile. Because good fences make good neighbors. But a 10-ton pile of gravel and a blue toilet? That makes a statement. So, folks, let this be a lesson. Know your boundaries. Keep your surveys handy. And never, ever let anyone pave over your peace of mind. What would you have done? Would you have let them keep the driveway? Or would you have ordered the mulch? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Thanks for listening. Stay off my lawn.